And as always, a very warm welcome to this week's Life Issues. Now, what's the difference between a disciple and a follower, a believer, a churchgoer? Jesus said, "Go into all the world and make disciples." He then gave clear instructions about what it meant to be a disciple, with the apparent expectation that all who would follow him would also deny themselves and take up their cross. So why is it that in the modern church, and maybe also the not-so-modern church if we look back through history, we seem to have a two-tier system where all disciples are Christians, but not all Christians are disciples? Do you think? Especially, perhaps, in the light of the number of messages and teaching and books and conversation that there are available to us explaining what true discipleship is and why it's important for us to embrace it and how it works when we do. Like I say, it's not a new issue. Probably goes back through many centuries even of the church. But why did that split in understanding come? What is it in our heads that draws us away from discipleship and towards simply being a follower? And why is it important to get back to the right path? I mean, after all, if Jesus said, "To be my disciple, to follow me, you need to be my disciple," if I'm not a disciple, am I a Christian? We thought we would try and add our contribution to this conversation by inviting Dave Criddle to join us on this week's Life Issues. He is the author of The DNA of Healthy Discipleship, and you can find his work at davecriddle.com, published by Mathletes Publishing. So, Dave, do you think Jesus expected the discipleship code to be the pattern of Christianity?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Paul. And it's a great question. I love the introduction. And just to pick up on that question of, are all Christian disciples? Maybe another question. Is every school pupil who sat in a maths lesson or a history lesson or whatever it is a student? And on one hand, yes, of course they are. They're students. They've got their student ID card. That's why they're in school. But I can tell you there were classes that I sat in where I was anything but studious, where I wasn't applying myself at all. I was a student in name. And I think, yeah, all Christians are disciples. It is in some ways just another name for Christian. It's in the New Testament, you hear a lot more about disciples than you do about Christians. But on the other hand, we can apply ourselves as a disciple, and the word literally just means a learner, a student, an apprentice. We can apply ourselves to that and seek to become healthier and grow and develop and expand our discipleship, or we can not. And I know, again, speaking from my own experience, there are times when I've really been seeking to grow and develop in that walk with Jesus as his disciple. There are times when I haven't. And so, yeah, the code that you alluded to is sort of the foundation of the book I've written. And it's drawn from that Great Commission passage that you've already highlighted, where Jesus says to go into all nations and make disciples. But it's based on not so much how we do that, but the kinds of people, the kinds of disciples Jesus kind of wants us to be as we go about that. And so where I look at it, I see some things that seem to be really important to Jesus, both in the way he gives the Great Commission, but also just in the way that he disciples those first disciples anyway, but which sometimes can be lacking in my life. And sometimes I think can be lacking in the way that particularly in the West church ends up happening. And I'd love to dig into that a little bit more.
So what do you think it is that Jesus intended when he said, if you would be my follower, if you would follow me, then be a disciple? Because it does seem to be more than simply, well, a disciple is almost like a passive state where you're simply learning. It does seem to be far more active. It is take up your cross, follow me, identify with me in a very intentional, very proactive way. Why do you think it is that why do we need to continually bang the drum on this, Dave? Because surely Jesus said it, we want to follow him. Therefore, I mean, yes, with some variation and with occasional stumbles and a little bit of lethargy here and there and a bit of ambivalence and laziness and all of that. Take note. But surely it should be crystal clear to us, should be crystal clear to the church, that this is the pattern we aspire to and we strive for.
Absolutely. And I think there are different reasons that we forget that, or that we move away from that. One is path of least resistance. You know, we like an easy life. And actually, if there's professionals who are going to do it for you, and I speak as a church leader, as one of the professionals who might do it for you. If there are people, if we can outsource our biblical understanding, and if we can outsource our prayer life, and if we can outsource our community engagement and our evangelism, if we can just, it's all right. I don't need to go about sharing faith with my friends because it's all right. My church is doing an Alpha course. It's a path of least resistance thing. We can think, okay, it's being done, so I don't need to do it. So there's that. We have an enemy. There's a spiritual reality to this, and there's a sort of dampening of spiritual energy and vigor that we might otherwise have. And I think we have to recognize that, and we have to recognize there's a battle. There's someone who doesn't want us to pursue the kind of active, full-throated, two-handed, planting ourselves firmly on Jesus discipleship. A lot of us aspire to in our best moments, and in our worst moments realize that we don't really always get to.
So what does it do to my life if that is not the pattern that I aspire to? If I don't take hold of at least the goal of discipleship, what does it do to my experience and my living as a Christian? I mean, does it mean, if anyone would come after me, let them be my disciple, all right. But does that mean that if I'm not really aspiring to be a disciple, I have to wonder if I'm really a Christian?
I can't state I can't judge the state of your soul, Paul, and I wouldn't want to. But so part of my answer is I don't know. That's between you and Jesus. That's between every individual and Jesus. One of the things I do want to make sure we're careful to avoid is that this whole conversation ends up leading ourselves or leading others into a kind of works-based righteousness or a works-based salvation where we go, well, okay, Jesus' blood, Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, that was enough to save me. But in order to sort of prove that salvation or maintain that salvation or keep it in some way, I've got to be a good enough disciple. I've got to score enough on my tests. So that's where my image of a school pupil falls down a little bit, because they have to pass a test. They're going to have to write the essay or sit the exam or do the experiment, and they're going to be measured. There's something different going on in terms of discipleship, because we're going to be measured. Jesus looks at me and God looks at me and he sees Jesus. He doesn't look at my effort and my achievement and the state of my discipleship. Right. And so actually you mentioned the code thing, and the first part of that is having a deep confidence in Jesus. And so the first sort of section of my book is all about how we can develop a confidence in God, a confidence in Jesus that is actually going to root us firmly on things that are worth being rooted on. And one of the things I really try to highlight is that it's not so much a question of how strong is my faith in Jesus. It's about how strong is my faith because it is in Jesus. And actually it's the strength of Jesus that matters more than it's the strength of my discipleship or my faith.
And I think that is the key. And that, for me, that was the key looking at your book. And we'll unpack some of these ideas of the books we chat together, and maybe dial back to the code, the idea of confidence in a second. But first and foremost, it seems to be that you're laying out, and indeed that the Bible lays out. And when you stop and actually think about what Jesus says, sort of beyond the simple statement about what discipleship is, the other elements that he brings to his disciples in his relationship with them, that it actually does all seem to be about the R word, doesn't it? It's about relationship, and actually an active relationship with him. That's our confidence. That's our security. But also, that's the thing that keeps us on the right path, the assured path.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I said that the word disciple means something like student or apprentice, and actually apprentice is the better translation. Because it conveys much more of what was meant. And an apprentice isn't just someone who learns theory from books and then might one day put it into practice. An apprentice is someone who's learning by doing, but learning by watching the master at work, by being close to the master, by being able to say, oh, that's how he does that. That's what he does in this situation. And then starting to grow that and develop it. And so an apprentice without that close relationship master, well, they're not an apprentice. They're just learning theory from a book. We are not people who are meant to be learning theory from a book. God, in his grace and in his wisdom, has given us the Bible, and it's fantastic. But before that, he's given us Jesus. And it's that relationship. Absolutely. A disciple is someone who is following their master, following Jesus really, really well. So we've got to be cultivating that relationship. You're right.
You're listening to UCB Life Issues. I'm Paul Hammond, and my guest for this week's podcast is Dave Criddle. He is the author of a book. Well, actually, it's more than a book because there's lots of different elements to it. But he is the author of a work called The DNA of Healthy Discipleship. And for the scientists amongst us, DNA, of course, is all about code. And so you have taken the idea of code and used that as your 4 points. So let's start with the first one. You've mentioned it already. If we are going to experience true discipleship, meaningful discipleship, if we are going to find ourselves enabled to have the relationship that gives that close connection of an apprentice learning at the skills of the master, where does confidence come in then?
Well, if I'm going to be learning from my master as an apprentice, first of all, I need to know that they are the master. I need to know that they know what they're doing. I need to believe that Jesus really is the best way, that he really does know what the right way is. And so Jesus doesn't just start when he gives the Great Commission and say, go and make disciples of all nations. He starts by saying, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and do this. And what I take from that is that the very basis of anything we might do as a disciple maker, has to be rooted in the fact that Jesus has all authority. So when I try and take some of that authority for myself and think, actually, I know what's best for me, or when I put my authority in, I guess what we might call idols, huge theme across the Bible, and still alive and kicking today, whether that might be the idol of money or of wealth or of sex or of power or of whatever it might be. If I'm saying that actually that is my Lord, that is my master, I'm going to become a disciple of that instead of becoming a disciple of Jesus. And so that question of where is our confidence placed? Where are we putting our weight? Where is it that we're thinking, yeah, this is solid enough ground for me to stand on? And quite often we can get tempted to sort of, put some of our weight on Jesus, but also going to trust the healthy bank balance, or also going to trust the career to give us status or identity or meaning or purpose or joy or whatever it is. And actually, confidence as a disciple is about saying, no, all authority needs to go to him, and we're only going to trust things if they come from him.
Is there an element of submission in that then? That, yes, my confidence is in, but if my confidence is going to be in him alone, then I am surrendering myself to step out onto the foundation that he makes available. I think you use the image of a glacier, don't you?
Yeah.
Because thin ice, we all talk about stepping out onto thin ice, but actually you go, hey, sometimes the ice is pretty thick.
Yeah. No, I enjoy skiing. I haven't skied for a few years, but I enjoy it when I can do it. And yeah, you can find some pretty thick ice out there. But what's interesting is that if the ice is thick, but you don't trust it, you're never going to step on it. And if the ice is thin, but you do think, yeah, that could probably take my weight, you're going to step onto it. So it's not just about how trustworthy is the ice. And in the analogy we're using, the ice is Jesus. It is completely trustworthy. He can hold every single ounce of weight we might ever jump on, ski on, dance on, whatever we might do. He can take it. He can hold that. He is strong enough. The question is, are we going to step out? Are we going to put our trust in him? Because it's no good looking at something and going, yeah, okay, that might hold my weight. What matters is whether we're going to stand on it. And quite often we can think that other things are a little bit more, the ice is a bit thicker than we think. We think, yeah, that relationship or that marriage even, or that success, that can hold my weight. That'll give me purpose and identity, and that'll endure and that'll last. And it just doesn't. It's a lot thinner than we might think. And Jesus is a lot thicker as ice than we might think. So how do we put that confidence? And yes, submission is a big part of that.
You see, I'm not a skier, so ice maybe wouldn't be my analogy, but I do remember going on holiday and going up onto this cliff where they had one of those glass bridges, those glass things. And it was amazing how many people were approaching this place to stand on it, to walk across it with great enthusiasm. until they actually got to the point where they had to step on it and they could look down and they could see the drop underneath the glass, and how many people were going, oh no, I don't think I'll bother, I'll back away. Why does having that confidence in Jesus form the foundation for strong discipleship experience?
The early church was built on one rallying cry, which was simply, Jesus is Lord. That was the way that they proclaimed the truth of who Jesus is Lord. And because Jesus was Lord, Caesar wasn't, and the empire wasn't, and all the rest wasn't. And unless we're built on that one foundation, that Jesus is our Lord, and therefore nothing else can be, Jesus says you can't serve two masters. You got to pick. If we're not building, it's almost, the rest of it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how skilled we are at whatever it is, how skilled we are as in prayer or in Bible reading, or how good the teaching is we receive Sunday by Sunday. If ultimately we're saying, I'm only going to give Jesus so much, I'm not going to trust him with my everything, we're never going to get beyond a certain point in our relationship with him.
Which I suspect leads us nicely to the second letter of code, thinking about the DNA of discipleship with Dave Criddle. Code C is for confidence. O is for obedience. Oh, we don't like that one, Dave.
No, we don't. We don't like it at all. And yet it seems to be baked into what Jesus tells his disciples. You know, the Great Commission, which is the sort of foundation of what I've written in the book, is a command. He says, all authority is given to me. Great. We can have confidence in him. And so what? Where does that confidence lead? Therefore, go and make disciples. And then actually there's a kicker, because he just says, go and make disciples, baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then teach them to obey everything that I've commanded. And so actually, because those first disciples were obedient to that command and therefore taught other people to be obedient to that command, it carries on. And actually, you take obedience to Jesus's commands out of the church entirely, and it takes one generation for the whole thing to stop, because no one bothers to go and tell anyone else about Jesus and make a new disciple. But obedience to it, and I want to be clear, this is not just about do we follow certain rules. You used the R word earlier on, relationship, and actually yes. the Hebrew word that we translate as obey literally means hear the voice. It's this idea that if we hear the voice of God, if we hear his voice, then we'll be led into obedience. So it's about that closeness, that proximity, and that submission that comes from confidence in him and knowing that he does know best and he does want what's best. But then there's also that knock to our pride that says, we got to do what he says, not what we want. And yeah, you said, you're totally right. We don't like it because we want to obey ourselves. We want to follow ourselves. But I think we all know that often doesn't take us where we'd like to get to. So maybe obedience to Jesus is worth a try.
Absolutely. And the thing is, we often hear, and I think we would probably agree with the idea that obedience doesn't necessarily mean perfection, because we live in a flawed world. We are flawed human beings, best intentions and all of that. Sometimes we will stuff up. Sometimes we will get it wrong. Sometimes we will not resist the temptation that we should. Sometimes we will not do the things that we should. So it doesn't mean perfection. But we seem to live in an age where increasingly within church conversation, so let alone outside of church conversation, but within church conversation, the idea of obedience seems to be an option. That actually I can take what the Bible says, or I can take the call that's given, or I can take the commission that's been laid before me, and I can twist it. I can turn it. I can shape it into that which works best for me. And tell us your thoughts around the game of Twister in this.
Yeah. So my parents still have the Twister set that my brother and I used to play when we were little. And a while back now, I was playing it with my nephew, who was 4 at the time. But the thing about my parents' set of Twister is that it's broken. So the dial no longer works, which means that my way of playing it, he wasn't just following me giving these random commands, which is sometimes how we can think about God's commands. You sort of said, we sometimes want to pick and choose them. I think that when we do that, it's because they're a bit arbitrary, they're a bit random, aren't they? Why does God want to tell me about my sex life, or what to do with my money, or how to do this, or how I should engage with this, or the fact that I shouldn't gossip, or how I should use my words? It's all a bit random and it's all a bit arbitrary. What if there's a different way? And it can feel like just this random spinning of the dial, and God says, right hand on green, please. And it doesn't mean anything. But with my parents' set of Twister that I was playing with my nephew, I was choosing what he would say. It wasn't random at all. And actually, I could look at what he was doing. And if it looked like he was getting a bit too tangled and he was getting a bit sad about that, I could give him something easier to do. And if I thought a bit bored, he needs a challenge, I could tailor it specifically for him.
I'll be honest with you, up until that point there, where you actually became a benevolent authority figure for him, I was really worried. I was going to say, Dave, he was 4, for goodness sake.
Totally. So ultimately, I wanted him to have a good time. That was my goal. And so I knew that actually the commands, and I'm aware this analogy, it stretches things slightly, but the commands that I was giving him were ultimately for his good. Because what we both wanted in this situation was for him to have a good time playing Twister, and to give the other grown-ups in the kitchen a chance to cook in peace. But let's imagine a third game of Twister where actually I've walked entirely out of the room, and now it's just my nephew, a Twister mat, doing whatever he wants, and he's there going, I want to put my right hand on green. Great, I'll do that. I want to put my left foot on blue. I'm going to do that. Now I feel like doing that. And actually, there's no obedience anymore. There's not obedience to random commands, and there's certainly not obedience to a personal set of commands that are for our good. Now it's just doing exactly what he wants. And I think sometimes I want to play that third game of Twister. I want to say, this is where I want to go. This is where I want to put my hands. This is what I want to do. This is how I want to live. Thank you very much. And part of being a disciple is not having that attitude, and is saying, I may very, very, very much want to do X. Okay, Jesus, you're asking me to do something different. I'll follow you. And if we haven't submitted to him, if we haven't put our confidence in him, we'll never do that. But also, if we aren't taking time to listen to his commands in scripture and in prayer and in community with other people, we're not going to do that either. And so I think this obedience thing is huge. We often want to make discipleship about knowledge. I'm a mature Christian because I know more. Actually, maturity, according to Jesus, when he uses that image of the two builders, the wise and the foolish builder, he says the foolish builder is the one who hears this teaching of mine and doesn't put it into practice. And the wise builder is the one who hears this teaching of mine and puts it into practice. So it's not about how much you know. You can have a wise 6-year-old who knows virtually no theology, who doesn't know much of the Bible, but who that one little thing that they heard in Sunday school last Sunday, they've done it. And then you've got the person who is this heritage consumer of wonderful preaching, and they read the theology books and they know their stuff, and they can pull out their heresies and they can say, no, that's not right and this is right. But actually, it's been 30 years since they lifted a finger. And I've met both of those kinds of people. I should say, I've also met the people who've been the seasoned Christians and who know their stuff and who are living it out day after day after day. So I'm not just having a go at old people and saying children are great. You can, but we need to be careful not to think because I know more, I'm mature. If Jesus says actually, it's what we do with what we know that matters.
And I suppose looking at this as a sort of developing thought, when we find our confidence in Jesus and we realize that not only is the ice thick enough to hold us, but also it is the most solid foundation for us to build on, mixing the imagery there between the wise, all of that. But when we get that actually gives us the foundation to trust the commands on the twister mat and to follow them. Because when we stop listening to the commands, I mean, not only is there an element of risk that we'll fall flat on our face, but the whole game, in inverted commas, becomes a bit pointless, a bit purposeless, doesn't it? I mean, Twister isn't Twister unless you're following the instructions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And actually, there's that question, who gets to determine what the game is? And actually, I believe that Jesus knew every day of my life before they came to be. I believe that he knows every thought and intention and desire of my heart before I even have them. Um, he made me, not the other way around.
Yes.
And because he made me, not the other way around, I should trust him instead of him trusting me, and I should obey him instead of asking him to obey me. So if the game is life and is developing this discipleship with Jesus, then actually he knows that game far better than me. And I shouldn't try and set the rules.
Astute and focused listeners will realize that we are working our way through code in keeping with DNA. The title of your book being The DNA of Healthy Discipleship. You can find it at davecriddle.com, and Dave is my guest today while we think about what true discipleship, real discipleship is, how that works in our lives, and indeed how that works in our lives in modern society, where so often there seems to be such a desire for independence, to have my own truth, to run my own way, to follow my own path, that, again, the next word is one that we don't really like, because it's dependence. Unpack that within the context of discipleship for us.
Yeah, well, Jesus is really clear, isn't he? Without me, you can do nothing, he says. And the thing is, without, I didn't rely on Jesus's health to get a bowl of cereal this morning, and pour it into a bowl and eat it. I didn't feel as though I was consuming his divine and spiritual strength in order to do that. A lot of my life, I can do in my own strength. I can do the simple things. I can do a lot of stuff. There are some things that I want to do, and I realize, oh, that's a bit big for me. I remember coming home from the hospital on the day that our little boy was born and realizing, oh, that's a pretty big thing, isn't it? Not sure I know how to do this. Not sure I'm able to do that. And so I'm sort of in those moments going, God, please help me, because I can't do it by myself. But actually, Jesus doesn't paint the picture I've just painted, which is there's some things I can do and some things I can't do. He says everything. You can't do anything without me. And the truth is, I don't do anything without Jesus, because without him, I don't have any life or being or breath in my body at all. He made everything. The things that were made into the cereal that I had in my bowl this morning come from him. But also, I don't want to do anything without Jesus, because there's things that he might want me to do, which, because they're things that he wants me to do, only he is able to give me the strength to do them. And so if I want to be independent of Jesus, if I want to do things on my own strength, you do you, Paul, and I'll do me, we can all have our own life, look after number one. If we want that kind of independence, then Jesus says, okay, that you can have that, but actually you can't have that at the same time as being my follower, because to be his follower is to rely on him, is to draw from him. Without me, you can't do anything. And so it's a knock to my pride, but I've got to take that knock.
I suppose it's a bit like the rich young ruler, isn't it? Because he came, he got his wealth, he got his security, and he came, and Jesus says, okay, I want you to depend on me. I want you to lean on me. I want you to follow. If you want to follow me, you can follow me, but you're going to have to lean on me and trust me for where it goes. So give what you've got, give it away, and come follow me. And he was sad, so he walked away. Jesus didn't chase down the road after him, then sort of doing a deal and cutting a deal and pulling back on some of the expectation. He allowed him to go. We are free to follow our own route if we want.
Totally. It's just not a good one for us. It doesn't lead somewhere good. It's a perfect example, actually, of all of what we talked about. That man's confidence was entirely in his wealth, and everything that came with that. And so when Jesus gave him a command that sort of went against that and said, well, actually, if you want to be my follower, you're going to have to let me be your confidence, not your money. So give it away. He couldn't obey the command because he wanted to depend on himself instead of on Jesus. And it didn't go well for him. He had a pretty miserable experience as a result. But for us, if we want Jesus, we need to be willing to rely on Jesus. We can't expect to receive from Jesus the things that he wants to give but then to be able to live entirely in our own strength and do things on our own merit or our own values or anything like that. Dependence on him is just part of it. And you look at the early disciples. They were a ragtag bunch who really, they couldn't do a lot by themselves. And they messed up big time again and again and again. And really, one of the lessons they were learning is they couldn't do it by themselves. And I've got a little boy now. I've got a son, and I look at some things, and he's trying to do it. He wants to do everything all by himself at the minute. He's going through that independent streak where he wants to he's 2 years old, and he wants to try and do everything by himself. There's something he's just hopelessly incapable of doing these things. And actually, when he really wants something done, he'll come and bring it to us and ask us to do it. And that's the kind of attitude towards God, towards Jesus, that I believe we need to have. Instead of saying, well, I want to do it all by myself, bring it to him.
Again, it is about relationship, isn't it? It is about obedience. It is about dependence and about recognizing where the real authority, I suppose, lies in our lives. You use a phrase in the book, and I'm racking my brain as we're saying this, but I don't think it's in the dependence section where you do it. But it's about this idea of that we need to get off the throne, that actually we need to abdicate the rule of our life and recognize who the ruler is.
Yeah, totally. And actually, that's in a different section. And all of these, as this conversation, they all bleed into one another and merge into one another. So that's totally fine. But yeah, we cannot rely upon Jesus at the same time as relying upon ourselves. The image, one of the images I use in the book to talk about dependence is a campfire. And a campfire, in order to keep burning, it needs fuel. A fire needs fuel. And actually, there's at least a couple of kinds of fuel that a fire needs. It needs the logs. It needs the wood that needs to be there. And that's the part of building the fire and being on fire and receiving that energy from Jesus that I can control. I can take some logs and I can arrange them in a fire. I can choose to set time aside in prayer, in independent prayer on God. I can choose to order my finances in a way that say, God, I'm trusting you instead of trusting in my wealth. And therefore I will give. And therefore I will give sacrificially instead of saying, what if one day I need it? So there's things that we can do to put ourselves in that place of dependence. That's kind of like the logs that are being built for this fire. But then if the fire has no oxygen, it's going to go. It needs that. And that's the bit I can't do anything about. The wind is going to blow, and sometimes there's going to be a gust and the fire is going to fan into flame. And sometimes it's not going to be. I can't bring the wind. I can't control that. I'm a sailor. I know very well that I can't control the wind. And that's the bit where actually we need to say, God, I just need you to do this. And yes, I might have the greatest prayer life in the world. I don't think I do, but I might have that. I might have this. I might have the other. But actually, without God doing something and fundamentally shifting some things in my life, I can't do it. So if that fire needs these different kinds of fuel, needs wood, needs oxygen, needs heat, needs that spark in order to come alive and to keep on burning, so do we. We need to depend upon Jesus. We need the resources that can come only from him if we are to keep on burning and to keep on going.
And when we do that, when that is an active thing, when we are putting our confidence in Jesus, when we are being obedient to his call, when we are learning from the master as an apprentice, when we are hearing his voice and hearing what he is telling us to do, and we are laying ourselves on that and depending on that, what is the reality of difference that brings? The E in code is experience. So let me use that word. What is the experience that brings to my life that actually reveals to you and put this burden on your heart and mind to flag up to people that this is, even in 21st century Britain, the right way to live? It wasn't just a thing for first century Palestine.
Do you know what? I wish I could say that if you do all of these things, if you've got that confidence, that obedience, that dependence, then the experiences you'll have will all be good, all be easy, all be prosperous. Your businesses will succeed, and you'll have the greatest relationships, and you'll be wealthy. But obviously that's not what Jesus promises. If you want to be my disciple, take up your cross and follow me. Confidence in Jesus is about dying to yourself. Obedience to him is about dying to your own desires and saying, if you say it, I'll do it. Dependence on him is about dying to your own ego and pride and saying, actually, I need you and I can't do it by myself. So the experiences we have, I'm not going to come here and try and sell you something that's not true. I'm not going to say that it's going to be easy or that it's always going to be happier or nicer. But what I do believe is that it is always going to be better. There is a deeper depth to what life looks like when Jesus is on the throne than when we are. Because everything else is going to be a passing fancy. Everything else is going to let us down one day. We could have all the money in the bank. We can't take it with us. We could have the most fantastic family. One day, I will die or they will die. And, this isn't a particularly happy thing to say on UCB radio in the morning, but it is true. It's why Solomon in Ecclesiastes says it's all meaningless. Actually,
Yes.
if everything is based on what's down here below, it's all meaningless. The only way that there can be a meaning that is lasting and that is eternal is if there is something above what is down here below. That if there is something beyond it, above the sun. And there is. Hallelujah, there is. And that is Jesus. And so I've had times in my life which are absolutely brilliant. I've had absolutely fantastic mountaintop experiences of God, mountaintop experiences in my life. And actually in those times, being a sort of on the front foot, confident, obedient, dependent disciple means that we're going to have those experiences enriched by the fact that they're infused by God being part of them. And I've also had times in my life that have been really low and really rough. I talk about some of those in the book a little bit. I had a time of deep, deep depression after a marriage that ended due to my ex-wife's unfaithfulness. It was rock bottom stuff. And I'll tell you what, it was different because God was part of it.
Yes.
And those experiences didn't define me, and they still don't. My primary identity in those moments was not that I was a divorcee, was not that I was depressed. My primary identity in that moment was that I'm a son of God, I'm a child of God. And Jesus isn't ashamed to call me his brother. It says that in Hebrews. And actually, so whatever we experience, whether it's mountaintop stuff or whether it's deep valley stuff, there is a depth to it with Jesus that we cannot find anywhere else. And so actually each of those can sort of, whether it's high stuff, whether it's low stuff, or whether it's just sort of the middle ground experiences, humdrum life, all of them can be, if we will let them, an opportunity to grow deeper with Jesus. The Great Commission, central text of my book, is given to a bunch of disciples. And the way that Matthew describes them is that Jesus came to them on the mountain and they worshipped him, and some doubted. These are normal people who are worshiping Jesus because they've met him and they know how wonderful he is, and they're sort of in awe of him. And they're doubting because they've experienced some pretty rotten stuff, and they've seen him hang from a cross, and they've been confused by the whole thing. And my life's a little bit like that. I've not seen Jesus hanging on a cross. I've not followed him around in the Middle East for 3 years, but my life's got those ups and those downs. I've got that worship in me, and I've got that wandering and that doubt in me. And Jesus wants us to bring them all to him, the reality of the experience of this world and the reality of experiencing him, and to let those inform one another, because that's where discipleship growth happens.
And that's where, in that growth, the negatives of life that we are called to step away from, the things that negatively impact us, and they'll always be around us while we are in this plane of existence. They will always be there. They will always impact us to some degree. But it is that growth away from, that move away from the devastation of a life that is where I'm dependent on myself, where I'm following my own path, and things go wrong and there's nothing to hold me up, to that increasing growing into a relationship as a follower of Jesus, as a disciple, someone who does identify with him, somebody who does identify with the cross and sets that as the standard of your life. It is that the change, the blessing, if you like, is that I have something better, something more secure, something that guides me clearly. It's enriched, I think was the word you used.
Yeah, totally. And it means that we can grow. To be experienced is not just to have had an experience once, but to have grown. If I have a plumber come to my house and I discover that they started their training yesterday, compared with a plumber who comes to the house and they've been in the business for 30 years, I'm going to expect better results from the 30-year, experienced plumber. And the same should be true of our discipleship. When I look at the way that all of those first Christians, all those first disciples, the death that most of them experienced as a martyr was something they never would have done day one of their journey with Jesus. They'd have gone, no, too much for me, I'm out. They'd grown. There was something different about them as a result of having over the years grown and developed independence and obedience and confidence and all the rest of the things and love and all the things that discipleship entails. And I want to know, and if you're listening to this, I hope as a Christian, you would want to know that in 10 years' time, if you haven't returned to be with Jesus or he's not returned to be with us, then you've grown. I want to be in a healthier and a deeper place with Jesus in a year's time than I am now. And I hope that I am now compared with where I was 5 years ago. And I think as soon as we lose that and we go, you know what, I'm fine now. I've kind of made it. I'm sorted. I don't need to take any more steps with Jesus. Don't need to grow in any of this stuff. I'm just gonna sit tight till the end. That's the time when we probably slip from being a sort of active front foot apprentice of Jesus, real disciple, to someone who's just sort of biding our time and maybe consuming a bit of Christian content here and then to keep us ticking over. But actually, I want to be growing. And we're all made to grow, aren't we? Our bodies don't stop changing from the moment we're alive, we're born, to the moment we die. My little boy he's just about to turn 2, and we celebrate those milestones. When he takes his first steps or when he says his first words or all of those things, we've celebrated them because they show growth. And actually, that's because he's a more experienced human being than he was 2 years ago. He's learned things that he didn't know 2 years ago. And if they all stopped now, I'd be really upset. And it would be a bit weird when he's 10 and he can still only do the things that a 2-year-old can do. But in my discipleship, sometimes I can go, all right, I'll stop here. Yeah. Like Paul told people, you used to be spiritual infants. Do you want to grow a little bit now? But don't be a big baby. I want to be growing as a disciple, and I hope we all do.
So, final thought then from you. Because, and let me just remind you that Dave's book is called The DNA of Healthy Discipleship. You can find it at davecriddle.com, and indeed his perspectives on this are there for you to have a look at as well. But so I have heard you. I have gained the knowledge. I have become aware of the importance of this. What's the first step, Dave? If I have let the idea of discipleship slip, or if I have perhaps never understood that there is more to being a Christian than simply popping into church, having a listen, and then going my own way. If I want to be a follower, be a disciple, I want to take up my cross. I want to follow. I want to go into all the world and not just make disciples, but also teach them to obey. Where do I start today?
There's so many answers that I could give that would just be really glib. So I'll try not to give any of those. The answer that I want to give is to tell someone that. That could be a church leader, doesn't need to be. Could be someone who's in your church, doesn't need to be. Could be someone who you're married to, someone who's your parent, or someone who's your child, or someone that someone else who is a follower of Jesus. Tell them, I don't want to stay put with where I am right now. I want to step forward. And I'm not saying that they will immediately have the answer and say, well, do this, do that, do the other. But just that act of saying that out loud. There's a time when Jesus sees a man who is blind, and he knows that he's going to heal that man. But before he does, he says to him, what do you want me to do for you? he's not doing it. He doesn't ask that question so that he can hear the answer. He's doing it, I think, so that the man has to say out loud what it is that he wants. And there is something powerful about us going to another Christian and saying, I don't want to stay where I am. I want to take a step forward. And then make a plan with them. And that plan could be, okay, we're going to work on our prayer lives together. And we're going to buy, Pete Gregg's book, How to Pray. I'm not going to try and flog my book too much, but pick something and take a step. Read some of the Bible together. Do something. But the one thing I would really encourage you not to do is nothing. Because if you do nothing, you'll stay where you are. If you do something, there's a chance that you'll grow. So find your person and say to them, I want to take a step forward with Jesus, and then work it out together with Jesus in prayer.
Jesus didn't say to his disciples, be a disciple, because it was just a notion. He called us to follow him in a way that is more than simply acknowledgement, but it is an active, interactive relationship, because that is good for us. It is good for our lives. It's good for the lives of those around us. It's good for our relationship with him. It's good for our ability to serve him in the world and be the people that he wants us to be and fulfill the potential that he lays out before us. So often it seems in this age, the idea of conforming to the command of someone else, it's something we rail against. It's something we pull against. And yet a loving Heavenly Father took a look at us and realized that unless we followed his commands, Twister would be a pointless exercise. But if we followed his commands, if we gave ourselves to his plan, if we depended on him to show us the right way, if we experienced his wisdom and his love and his guidance along the way, we would grow into something that was a precious experience, a moment, and developed us. Fundamentally, that game of Twister is a good illustration of the DNA of healthy discipleship. Have a look at Dave's work for yourself by going to his website, davecriddle.com. It has been, Dave, an absolute pleasure to chat with you about this today. And thank you as well to my producer, Rebecca, for today's program. I'm Paul Hammond. Why not join us next week for another Life Issues? Ta-da!